So we're going to get the conference off to a great start. Sue is our first keynote speaker. Sue Beckingham is Principal Lecturer in Information Systems in the Department of Computing at Sheffield Hallam University. She's a Senior Fellow of HEA. She's a Fellow of CEDA. She has her CMALT qualification certification. You may know about her and her life because she's shared a lot about herself and her personal learning journey through social media. She talks a lot about her personal learning journey as a lifelong learner. She has a TEDx talk that I highly recommend. Great for this venue. She's spoken a lot about wisdom, and we have wisdom up around the ceiling. Wisdom, understanding, learning, and I expect she's going to take us on a journey around that here today. She's an internationally acclaimed expert on digital networking. She specializes in leveraging the power of social networks to develop the personal learning networks and employability of students. Sue is the co-founder of the highly praised Learning and Teaching in Higher Education weekly Twitter chat, LTHE chat, which many of you may participate in, I'm sure you're familiar with, and attracts participants from all around the world. In 2015, she was selected by JISC as one of the top 50 influencers in social media in higher education. She's an advocate of both informal and formal learning, and today she's going to speak to us about revisiting the affordances and implications of interconnectedness and socially mediated publicness. So please, she's going to speak for about 45 minutes and we'll take questions after that, but please give her your full attention, and as she's speaking, think about how what she's saying applies to your own lives and the places in which you work. Thank you very much.
All right, well, this is exciting. So, this is an overview of what I've proposed to talk about. As an advocate of social media, I can and do wax lyrical about the potential of digital spaces. However, as I started to research what I was going to talk about for this conference, I wanted to look at the data, the dialogue, and the actual doing. And learning analytics is something that's becoming very popular with the universities. Some are further ahead than others. But the whole data thing really got me even more curious as I started to research my talk. So I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. Some of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to skate over quite fast. The resources to look at and revisit later. There's a lot of guidance in there. So don't think I'm trying to rush past it, but I just wanted to put them in. And I will share the presentation through SlideShare, and of course it will be shared through Alt and recorded as well. References will be found in the footnotes of the presentation, so I've not put references actually in all of the slides. Any images that aren't cited are from Pixabay, and they're free for use, just so people know. So in 1999, Douglas Adams gave us some suggestions about how to stop worrying and learn to love the internet. He said that anything that gets invented after you're 30 is against the natural order of things. I think we'll all argue that we'll disagree with that, although Snapchat still is something I struggle with, despite all the help from Suzanne. Sheila, the chair of Alt, recently blogged and said, I think when our world is in such a state of flux, it's important to ensure that ethics and developing criticality are at the heart of education. We need to be questioning the validity and basis of everything just now. And I took that advice on board. So I'm going to start with some future predictions taken from the past. So in 1975, Seacard said, a full analysis of all its implications, privacy in computers, the skills of the psychologist, the anthropologist, the sociologist, the lawyer, the political scientist, and ultimately the philosopher will be needed. And I think that's very true, and it's true still to this day. The computer is widely feared it constitutes a threat to the middle class employment. When we're talking about technology, there's a fear, the Internet of Things, about is that going to replace jobs? They're all concerns that still continue. If you've read 1984, the telescreen in the room was something that was actually going to be listening. Fast forward, the smart TV, listening into everything you say. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of concern about what it was actually doing. And even in their terms and conditions, Samsung was saying, please be aware. And yet we're moving towards now, in America, St. Louis University are giving students Echo Dots as FAQs, as a means to gathering information that they can just ask those questions. How secure is all of this? I think we're still trying to find out. In No Sense of Place in 1986, Morowitz imagined this situation where if all the walls were brought down and we were all in one open space, what would that look like? What would we hear? And he gives this scenario. It would be somewhere where we could hear what teachers were saying, what people were saying to the children, politicians having one drink too many. If we fast forward, we have Facebook. I'll say no more on that for the minute. Howard Rheingold in 1993 predicted what might happen when you went into the supermarket and the data that might be collected over the course of time and then put on an optical disc and sold as a marketing tool. How many people have loyalty cards? That's exactly what it does. Whether they sell it or not, well, we know that there are issues there. And then Gross in 1999 was predicting the millions of embedded electronic measuring devices that would probe and monitor what we're doing. We fast forward, smart technology, the Internet of Things is happening now. There are all sorts of devices that are monitoring what we're doing, and people are buying these, putting them in the houses. We fast forward, there's a smart fridge. I don't know whether anybody's got one now. John Lewis is selling them at £2,749. But they provide access to the internet. You may have read it in the paper a month ago. Dorothy, her Twitter account has now been closed down. But she was a young girl, if you didn't hear the story, where she was actually had a mobile device confiscated because she wasn't concentrating when she was cooking a meal and actually set something on fire. So she then tried to contact her friends through a Wii and various other devices, and they were confiscated, and our last resort was the fridge. I think it's quite a bit of initiative, really, from something my daughters would do. And there's concerns about the consequences of computers and internet continue. So bear with me, because I'm going to just take you through a bit of a journey of some of those concerns. Because although the concerns about social media are apt and really relevant to today's age, we've had concerns for a long time, and some of those concerns are still with us. And there's things that we need to be able to understand and have conversations with our students, our colleagues, our family, to help them really get to the point where they know what's dangerous and what isn't. So the dark web versus the deep web. The dark web's the bit that we really need to concern ourselves about. The deep web is where things are hidden, but they're hidden for the right reasons. And, you know, if we're thinking about online banking, medical records, we would hope that they would be safe and not be exposed to the public. And obviously the surface web is where we're using the World Wide Web ourselves. And there are social consequences of the internet use, and there's the dystopian view and the utopian view. So on the one hand, people have talked about Katz and Rice wrote, you know, the internet has bleak consequences, but it also has overwhelming potential. And there is both. There is no one or the other. And on privacy, Weber talks about those that argue in favour of post-privacy. So if privacy was abandoned and we shared everything, you know, this utopian view, then wouldn't that be better? And yet, on the other side, the defenders of privacy have, quite rightly, fears about what that might mean. Talking about I can't say that word, and dictatorship. If anybody's read about Bentham's Panopticon prison, this goes back to the 1700s. It was a prison where it was circular, not dissimilar to this room, where the guard would be in the middle. The prisoners couldn't see the guard, so they never knew whether they were being watched or not watched. And people have taken this concept and looked at how information systems could be using that to take our data unknowingly to ourselves. I'm just skating through a few quotes over the years, and these date back to the 80s and the 90s. There's this fear of data surveillance, disinformation, the super panopticon, electronic panopticon, panopticon sort, are all talking about the control and the worry about surveillance. And in today's age, if we think about it, you know, these could be the things that are actually covertly tracking keystrokes of staff. What are they looking at on the internet? It's all possible. Parents, as you know, can monitor what the children are doing. And even public transport cards, they're monitoring the movements and tracking what we're doing and where we're going. But one way to challenge this, Mann and colleagues looked at an inverse panopticon of surveillance, as they called it. So they flipped that over from the French words below and to watch. So how could these technologies help us? So it may be that we become the surveyors of the surveyors, surveying the surveyors. So, you know, that could be customers photographing shopkeepers, police officers. There's plenty in the news where that's actually happened, people taking videos where police have enforced and been brutal to people that they've got in their hands. And how could this be used in our classrooms by students? Something to consider. Students can record what we're doing. Hopefully we're not doing anything in the classroom that we wouldn't be proud of. It's something to think about. So this idea of equivalence, surveillance or counterveillance, I'm sure Teresa will tell me that's not how you pronounce it, if you're listening. We're supposed to bring power to the people. So Weber talks about Google Glasses. I don't know whether anybody managed to ever get a pair, but they've kind of been and gone and done their day. But people were worried, people were suspicious. You know, if you walked around with Google Glasses, you know, are you filming me? I would certainly be suspicious. And then if we think about the filter bubble, if you've not read this book, it's definitely worth looking at. And this is where invisible algorithmics edit the web. We know and experience, all those of us that use Facebook, that we don't actually see everything that's posted. And we certainly don't see it in the order that it's been posted. But the internet's exactly the same. If you sit down with a friend and Google something, you might be quite surprised. You'll not get exactly the same results. You're served what the computer, Google, thinks you ought to know, based on previous searches. And there's filter bubbles and echo chambers that can both increase exposure to diverse perspectives, but they can also create ideological segregation. And this research that Flaxman done has actually found that there's both. It can actually bring us the things that we see on the internet, whether that's through social media or through the internet, can do both. And if you're not scared yet, then you need to buy this book. It's coming out on the 17th of September, The Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. So going on to data. A day in data. It's quite frightening and staggering, the amount of data that we've got. 500 million tweets, 294 billion emails. Oh my goodness. If anybody could ban anything, I think it would be the email, or at least revisit what that should look like. And there's various others, infographics that portray how much is shared in the Internet Minute. You may have seen these before. But it's increasing. When you look at it like for like over the years, it's increasing. The number of websites are increasing. 1 million new internet users come online every day. That's 11 people per second. If we look at Facebook, Facebook captures around 600 terabytes of data from its users. That's absolutely huge. What information is that actually capturing? So to some extent, we're drowning in data. And I'm sure if you look at these examples, you know, the reports that we've got to read, the notifications, the information that we have in meetings, pre-meetings, post-meetings, etc. It's a concern. How many people have 2 screens at work? I'm actually quite jealous of these 2 screens because they're bigger than mine. But the objective of showing you this is that not only do you have your screens, you've probably got your mobile phone, you might have other devices. So this information overload is quite concerning. But it's not a new concept. And if we go back to the 1685, this was quoted, people were of fear of books. It will make the following centuries fall into a state as barbarous as that of the centuries that followed the fall of the Roman Empire. And there's a chasm. This is a good article between technology and corporate culture that really makes me think about the technology reality, what is possible and what's actually done. So I'll just take you through these. We've got unlimited accessibility of everyone to everyone by many communication channels. Everyone is expected by managers to be available 24/7. Sending messages is easy to do, and it's free. And we sanction the unlimited sending of these messages. People still send emails when there's no need to send emails. It's affecting our attention. There's no doubt about it. There's queued messages. My email box, after going back off holiday, is quite frightening. I don't know how I'm going to get through those emails and do a full-time job, and I'm sure you're the same. And yet we're supposed to keep up with those and respond promptly. And working from home technology, which, you know, I get an awful lot done working at home, but there's still no clear understanding about the policy of where to place that work-life barrier. And that's something I think we've had to try and develop ourselves. And it can work to your favour. You know, if you've got children or dogs, you want to take those out for a walk first thing and you want to work later in the evening, then that's your prerogative. But that being able to turn off and on from your technology and is something that we're still grappling with, I believe. And this multitasking that we're expected to do more increasingly. Not everybody is good at multitasking, and neither are our students, although they would give us the belief that they are. Technology can be distracting. And that was written by Strother. So each year, the Ipsos Global Survey, CIGI, Ipsos Global Survey is done, and they've actually surveyed 25,000 users. And I just want to take you through some of the responses from that. Social media companies were second only to cyber criminals when it comes to fueling online distrust. More than half of those concerned about their online privacy say they're more concerned than they were a year ago. I certainly am. I'm rethinking about what I'm doing. A majority admit to falling for fake news. I think we're getting a little bit more savvy, but not all of us. And it's an education, it's something we need to keep talking about. You know, if it's too good to be true, then it probably is. Be careful of those links that you're clicking on, the information that you're being given. And this distrust in the internet is causing people to change the way that they behave online. Less than half of the global citizens express at least some degree of confidence that any of the algorithms are unbiased. 32%. 68% obviously are the opposite. And then there's, I guess, a bit of a contradiction to what people are saying. Some are saying that they feel that the lack of transparency is exploitive, and yet by contrast, a lack of human emotion expressed confidence because it wasn't subjective. So, you know, we're at a point where we can't really agree. So we need to remind ourselves that when we're using social media, it is based on a model providing a free service in exchange for advertising. And it always has been. And I think as technology advances and gets more sophisticated, and you get more personalised and potentially relevant adverts, this could be useful. But it's a double-edged sword. My husband certainly won't be pleased if it's telling me more things that I can shop, especially if it's shoes and handbags. So, hope on the horizon. Recent headlines. We've had compromises of email with Facebook and Google, and breaches with the hotel chain Marriott, and new changes to our data protection, introducing GDPR. So there's lots of work going into looking at personal data protection, and these are reports you can look at later if you want to go into more detail. And Buttarelli, in a keynote, talked about part of the responsibility is enabling the individual to challenge what you do with the information. And I think this is something that's really important, something we need to fight for individually and collectively. The right to be forgotten was a case in 2014 that actually, I guess, kick-started a little bit to get GDPR in so that he could take his information off the internet, and that's something we can now ask for. And then there's cookies. I think it's really important that we understand what cookies mean. How many people get really annoyed when you go on a website and you see this sign up and it says accept, and you just click accept and you carry on reading your article? Hands up if people have done that. Quite a lot. Do you ever read the cookie settings? Some people will and some people haven't, and it's enlightening. There are different types of cookies. There are the ones that are functional and really important to keep the website flowing, but they're the ones where we sell the data, that people can sell the data. They collect the data and they'll sell them on. But remember, the cookie settings are an opt-in now. You have the choice to accept or reject. So when we're concerned about the data and people selling that and using websites or social media, you have that choice to opt out of it. And cookies come in different flavours. So as I mentioned, there's the functional ones. This is a bit of a traffic light, so strictly necessary, the green ones. The functional ones may be set up by third-party providers. Do we know who they are? What does that mean? And then there's the targeting cookies. So they're actually gathering this information, and that will follow you around the internet, and certainly if you shop online, you'll find the things that you're looking at follow you around with little adverts. And the privacy policy. And these people are really quite clear about, you know, what they're doing. If you read the small print, which obviously a lot of us don't, it says on the Wired website, if you don't agree to the terms contained in this privacy policy, you must immediately exit the service. So it's a choice. And Wired's privacy policy is conducted by Condé Nast, who have 1 billion consumers in 32 markets through print, digital, video and social platforms. So just visiting one website, what you're looking at could be shared a long way. There are also optional free apps via Facebook. A recent one was the one that could make you age. Who created this? Where's that data going? They're dangerous. I would really suggest that people don't use these things if you don't know where your data's going, unless you're happy for that data to go there. And ironically, when I went in to actually read the article, of course I came up for the cookies, supporting great journalism, because this is where the advert was from. So the Information Commissioner's Office can tell you about cookies, small text files, the good things that you can do, that they're useful, the relevant things, but it's the extra, and you need to make that choice whether that website, that social media site is doing that. The Internet Society is asking global leaders to prioritise digital security. So there's work going on. The Online Trust Audit and Honour Roll does an annual survey, which is quite interesting, in America, and it looks at top websites. Say top, it'll look at the most popular. It'll look at banking, it's commercial, and shopping, and all sorts of different health websites. And it looks at consumer protection, site security, and privacy. And what's interesting is, whilst websites are getting better, people are getting more vigilant and caring, if that's the right expression. One bit in the summary, because it's a very big report, there's a nice infographic that brings out some of the data. Over 42% of these sites use web trackers to share information with third parties. So, even the websites you think you could believe and trust, so health websites, banking websites, in terms of trust, might be something to consider. Cambridge Analytica, I'm sure you've heard about. This is where a Facebook app called This Is Your Digital Life, information for people that were actually using that was shared. Allegedly, people were notified if their details were involved. But again, if you've got a busy Facebook site, do people see that? Do they understand what that actually meant? So the Information Commissioner's Office, which is also connected to GDPR, reminds us that you share data constantly online, but there is data protection law that they're developing, and I don't think we're absolutely there yet, or they're absolutely there, but the idea is that it will help us. And it provides information about how you can do that safely. There are lots of social media fact sheets that could be useful to use with your students, with family, with friends. They're all available on the ICO website, and there's a whole host of guidance on your rights. I'm not going to go into those details, but it's there to revisit afterwards. And the concern is that, we want to strengthen the rights of people to take back control of their personal data. So this idea of being able to have data erased if something's on there is there. You have a month to respond to requests. And it's making some money. In 2019, British Airways were fined. They lost 500,000 names and addresses of customers, and they were fined 183.4 million. The Marriott Hotel, they were fined 99.2 million. Sadly, the year before, when data was shared through Cambridge Analytica, it was pre-GDPR. Facebook were fined £500,000. If it was today's time, it would have been £1.26 billion, because it's 4%, up to 4% of the revenue of the organisation. And there's GDPR Coalition Ireland, that's a useful resource to look at, and something called the Five Rights Framework, again, resources to have a look at afterwards. So what are the implications for education? The JISC website is very informative, and I know universities and those responsible for the data that we hold for students will be completely on the case, and it needs to be that we document why information is held, how it's collected, when it will be deleted or anonymised, and who may gain access to it. And going back to learning analytics, this, I think, is really important, that we're transparent with our students, that if we are collecting the data and how we're using it is made explicit to them, so that they don't have unspoken fears that they're talking about with their peers. It's about being transparent. Before I write my name on the board, I'll need to know how you're planning to use that data. Students are going to begin to question if they've not already started questioning. So that's the data. So in terms of dialogue, as I say, I can wax lyrical about how social media can empower individuals to become communicators, creators, curators, critics, conversationalists and collaborators, and to continue that dialogue face-to-face. And I talked about that back in 2013 when I did a talk on digital scholarship at Reading University. But social is a behaviour, not a channel, and people like social interaction. And I think it's important that we don't get too worried, although it is a worry about the data and those concerns, that we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we don't utilise these social networking tools to have good experiences with our peers. I really like this sketch note by Tamne Vore, and I agree that through the sharing, I certainly learn every single day. I get my mobile phone out and travelling into work, and I learn something new from someone in my network. And it's just so powerful, and it can be powerful. This is a Node Excel map of FOTI 2011. Was anybody there? Does anybody remember the future of technology in education? So this, there's a few people you can see on there. This conference was a free conference. It's at ULCC, and you had to tweet on Twitter to actually get a ticket. And I didn't get there the year before. And I can remember tweeting and saying, I really would like to go to this conference this year. And Frank Steiner, who was one of the organisers, picked it up. But then when he picked it up, he started to look at my online presence and my profile. And because I'd recently done a couple of presentations, put those on SlideShare, which then went onto my LinkedIn profile, he then saw some of the things that I've been talking about and invited me to be one of the keynotes. So not only did I get to the conference, I actually got to talk there, which was quite uncanny. And there was an article in the LSE Impact blog, which is a great blog to read, about scientists who selfie. So changing the stereotypes of, the jobs that we actually do, those visuals that we can share through social media can be really, really helpful. Not just for us, but for our students and our family and our children. But it's directing people to the right places and connecting with the right people to make sure that they're seeing the right things. I always say Twitter's only as good as the people that you actually follow. And there's this opportunity to develop communities where you share something in common. We've done that face-to-face for forever. That's no new concept. But what the internet can do and social media can do is bring people across the globe. And I love this quote from Sherry Spelak. May it never cease to amaze us that overwhelmingly vast majority of humanity plays by the rules and means well. We do have to continue to believe in people that, we can share good things. Otherwise, it's time to give up. When I was looking at the idea of belongingness, Stanford University have got a belonging project, which starts off really well. The sense of belonging is deeply important to emotional health and personal well-being. But it ends when it's talking about the students. They're that they can develop a sense of belonging when they feel connected to other people, especially those who share their distinct life experiences, interests or goals. And that I disagree with. And Christina Rancy has got a really nice quote that she's got pinned on her Twitter account that says, "It is our variability that gives us collective strength." You know, students want to meet lots and lots of different people. We want to meet lots of different people, not just the people that share the opinions that we have. Diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. And I quite like this quote: "Space becomes place when it acquires symbolic meaning and a concrete definition, marking the whole spectrum of identity and sense of belonging." So the spaces to me are the structure, the places that we can frequent, but it's the places, they only become meaningful if people are invited into those and feel welcome. Because belonging can also be considered as something that's owned. You have to be suitable, you have to be acceptable. The antonym of belonging is being free and independent, self-sufficient, liberated. And a lot of us like to go off-piste and be like that, and that's not a bad thing. But in terms of belonging and social media and communities, we need to make sure that people are accepted, they're wanted, drawn in. So whatever the community that you might have, you know, look at the quiet people, draw those people in, just as you would do if you were face-to-face, the ones that are quiet, the introverts. And of course, even through some of the positives, there are still issues. It's really important that we still continue to have the conversations about the digital footprint that we're leaving when we use any online tools. And at Edinburgh, there's a really nice resource, the Digital Footprint. If you've not already seen that, do visit it, that you can use with your own students. And along the way, we're having to learn constantly new literacies. So graphic literacies, you know, how do we read infographics? What does it mean to have a personal learning network? Multitasking, is it the right thing to do? And we need to build ethical literacy and trust and know that we can be trusted in the things that we actually share. And there are things that can be missed easily online, emotions. And some of the ways that people are overcoming this now, they're using emoticons, emojis, GIFs. GIFs are really popular on Twitter. But what they can actually do is show some of the emotions that we've got, whereas text is flat and doesn't necessarily show those things. And there's something about what is said, not said, as well as how it's actually said. I picked up on some tweets a couple of weeks ago. It was when the BTEC and A-level results were coming out one day apart. And there's lots always talked about the A-level results, but what about the BTEC? You know, we must remember. And this tweet was saying, you know, there's lots of fuss about A-levels, but not BTEC. And it was the BBC that said, you know, they questioned some of the students when they're interviewing them. Did you not get along with A-levels? Not understanding that, you know, these vocational qualifications are equally as important. I left school and went to college because I didn't like the A-levels that were on offer. I actually wanted to be a domestic science teacher. I love cooking. So I went to college for 2 years and I had a magnificent experience. It did actually give me the qualifications to get into university, although that's another long story, but I didn't go to university. In fact, I didn't start university until 2004. If you want to know more, you can ask me at coffee. And then people responding to that. So when there's information missing, it's absolutely fine to jump in and say, you know, what about this point of view? And Laura Burden came in and told her story, the STEMettes celebrated both, which is great. It's an organisation that brings girls in STEM together, if you've not heard of that. And of course there is toxic Twitter, and there's lots that I could say about this, and we could spend another 3 hours, 4 hours, days, weeks, months talking about the things going on, and we need to be aware of that. There's disinformation, misinformation and fake news. We need to help our students understand what the difference of those things are. There's constantly information saying about, we're online. Roughly 3 in 10 US adults, apparently through Pew Research, are online all the time. When I looked at the methodology, they'd only actually consulted 1,502 people, but there we go. The Economist in 2019 was talking about the social media addiction getting worse. And in retaliation to this, Josh Hawley has come up with a Social Media Addiction Reduction Technology Act, the SMART Act. It's real. I looked at the details. There's a PDF, you can have a look at it later. To prohibit social media companies from using practices that exploit human psychology or brain psychology. And that all starts well. That sounds interesting, and I think it needs to be looked at. But what it's actually proposing is that it will stop the infinite scroll, the elimination of natural stopping, autoplay, and any badges or rewards linked to social media. So in short, that would be the autoplay from YouTube, infinite scrolling on Twitter and Facebook feeds, outlaw gamification in Snapchat, and it would bring up conspicuous pop-ups to make sure that that actually happened and you're aware. However, sadly, within the same document, it said that this does not include email. But there is concern about the infinite scroll and the red alerts, and there's something about the use of red being important. And when you look at your mobile phone, you'll see the little circle of how many emails you've yet to read, how many notifications on your social media channels you've got to read. And to some degree, it can make you anxious, and it makes others more anxious. It is a worry. And there are implications of the like buttons and what that means. There's a good TED talk that Jack Dorsey from Twitter has given. And they're even thinking about, or he's talked about, removing the like buttons because it makes people so incensed. David Hopkins on his blog has wrote about what does it mean to like something. If somebody's wrote a post, there's actually an unhappy post, a sad or angry, and we're liking it, what does that actually convey? Is the like and equivalent type buttons appropriate still? And there's research going on about managing young people, especially well-being and mental health. So all these resources are in the footnotes. Education for a Connected World, there's the UK Council for Internet Safety, things going on there. The government has got an online harms paper, there's information in there to consider. And we need to think about what not to share. And there's guidance, again, from the government and a share checklist. Think about the source, the headline, analyse it. Has it been retouched and changed? And is it false? Are there errors? It's quite useful to use with your own students and have those conversations. Because there's no good just banning social media and technology. That's never going to happen. They're only going to do it when they're outside the room. We need to have these conversations. So a lot to think about there, and I hope that wasn't too rushed, but as I was gathering the information, I wanted to make sure that I captured those so that you can revisit them yourselves and read in depth if you want to later. But it would be remiss of me if I didn't talk about the doing and how it can be done. Social media can be used usefully and powerfully. So this is a work in progress. I'm trying to put together an infographic that can fit on one page of how it could be used. So student recruitment, promoting research, promoting events, Achievements of staff and students, I think, is really important. Social media can be used really effectively for crisis communications. Twitter's the first thing we go to when our VLE goes down. It tells us, you know, oh, this is what's happening. Business partnerships, graduation, keeping in touch with our alumni is really helpful. And then there's the people and the teams. So in terms of our students and staff, we can use it to build communities. We can have interactive activities inside and outside of the classroom and so on. But we also need to think about the things in the outside circle, the well-being, the spaces, protocols, responsibility, and evaluating what we actually do. It's important that we think about the impact of what we're doing, what students are doing, for good and for otherwise. Because we need to look at that, and if things do go wrong, how can we put them right? How can we help our students put things right? And now I'm going to share some of the things that there's so many things I could share, but I've just picked out some useful things about how people can gain information from the community. So this is a snapshot, hope you don't mind, Lorna, of starting her Seymour, and she actually went out through Twitter to get some advice and got 7 pages of tweets. So she storyfied it, which was a really good idea, and then made it into PDF, because you may know that Storyfi's gone, but there is Wakelet as a recovery, which we use now. David Hopkins, blogging, writing, getting people to write with him, I think is really important about all these thorny issues around technology. Santano, I don't think is here today. For the last couple of years, he's come up with this idea of the HE blog swap. So actually having a buddy and swapping, so doing a blog post as a guest on each other's blogs is a really lovely idea. And through the conversations of actually doing that, you're extending your network, and I think that could be really helpful. There's people like Helen Webster that have created mini courses, the 10 Days of Twitter, which other people can use. It's got Creative Commons licenses. There's crazy friends like Suzanne who use Snapchat, but very effectively. But what's really interesting is when she blogs about it, she talks about what the students have said and shares that with people. I'm still sitting on the fence on Snapchat, but it works with her students. And if it works with your students, then that's what's important. It's having the conversation with them. Never be afraid to ask your students, I'm going to try this new thing. Let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, we'll scrap it. We can use something else. That's fine. And that just shows you how many Snapchat users there are. So it is a popular space for younger people these days. And then there's tools like WeChat, which is used in China and has been used by a tutor to give feedback. So a similar thing to the Snapchat, having those interactions, and the students really liked it. And then there's other opportunities. There's a Bring Your Own Devices for Learning online course. The latest team was Sheila, Alex, Neil and Deb and Suzanne. Ask Suzanne why she was juggling later. But what was interesting was this, that we'd started off with the 5 C's: connecting, communicating, curating, collaborating, and they took that forward. And there's LTA chats, lots of people to look at there, and Chris Rowell's book, which a lot of people from ALT have contributed to this book. Lots of other useful resources in there, and I'm afraid I've run out of time. I forgot to look at my watch again. But just quickly want to mention the SMASH team, which is my students who've, well, they rebranded what I was calling a social media special interest group to Social Media for Academic Studies at Hallam, the SMASH. And they've created card activities. And to start with, they started with the tools, but then they came up with the latest set of cards, which they came to themselves as reverse social media, where they looked at what do we actually want to achieve. and the tools that can actually do that. And I felt very proud of the students because this is kind of self-led with me giving them some information, but introducing and bringing your students in as partners to look at some of the thorny issues, I think is very, very important, and to work on this together. So I'd highly recommend doing that. Just quickly speed past this. There's Lorna's word of caution. I'd say give it a go, because collectively, everybody in this room, the networks that you've got, the knowledge that you've got, the things that you say, your online presence can be really, really powerful. We can all help each other learn, and by being open and sharing that, you can make a really big impact. And if you think you're too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and what a romp through a lot of information there. The slides will, of course, all be available for you, but just before we head to coffee, I think if there are questions from anyone in the audience, if you could, we'll try to spot you. We've got some roving mics who will run. If you could say where you're from and introduce yourself to the room before asking your question, and remember to make sure that it's that you're heard, that you're holding the microphone before you speak. Maybe reflecting on how, or giving questions for Sue, or giving examples about how social media is used in your institution, or how you're using it to create social networks amongst students where you work. So do we have any questions from the audience that we can see? Just give us a wave. It's a little bit hard to see from the... A little bit hard. Let's see if we can go over here to lady in the peach.
It's Frances. I'm Frances Bell. I'm not from an institution. I escaped a few years ago. So I'd call myself an itinerant scholar now. But I want to also thank Sue. I don't know how you achieved that broad sweep in your talk. And I really enjoyed it. But there's one thing I wanted to ask you about, which is to do with the doing. And as you were talking, I was wondering what faculty in different disciplines, you know, what people in the psychology discipline, in the information systems discipline that you and I are associated with, in computer science, in business schools, which was the last place I worked, what could they be doing with their students to help them think about how they could do things differently in the future?
Well, I think in terms of this, if we look at psychology, is actually doing some research, getting the students doing that research and sharing. And I think it would be really powerful if our students across a broad spectrum of disciplines could hear from students actually doing that, rather than it just being the theory in the book, the theory that's in the journal articles, you know, bringing it to life. In terms of computer science, I've spoken about this many times when I've done training sessions for colleagues in computing, you know, where they've got perhaps a little bit vexed around the chosen VLE that we have. I'll not mention which one it is. And it's like, well, why don't you actually reinvent something yourselves? You know, the technology, the knowledge, the coding, you know, is not beyond the realms of getting staff and students to work together. Because if we were to reinvent spaces where we can connect, you know, the ideal online social space, what would that actually look like? And the only way we could find out is to, you know, put that out to students, to experiment. Because there is an element of you don't know what you don't know, and if you've not experienced it, how do you know that this is going to be effective or not effective? You know, so there would need to be lots of different trials. But I think, you know, collectively in computer science, we've got the potential. You know, why is it always America that comes up with a solution? And James Clay asked me to speak at an event a few months ago, and I talked about this idea of the ideal device that would give students where it would pull everything in, and I talked about that actually with some postgraduate students taking a couple of courses, data science and MSc computing. And one of the students actually contacted me afterwards. He says, you know, that's really got me thinking. And he's looking, when he finishes his master's, to do a PhD. And he says, I'd really like to take that forward, you know, so I think there's a potential to do that. There's lots to explore.
Thank you. We have another question here.
Thank you, Alan Williamson, University of Derby Online. It was a very thought-provoking presentation. Not only the privacy in social media, but what about VLEs? Just recently, in the last few weeks, I've noticed I've had to agree to various term conditions, which I confess I haven't read. But it's not just social media and retail that privacy potentially affects.
Absolutely.
Any comment particularly about that? That would be interesting.
Well, it's the next online course that we're going to be having to do, a mandatory one. And you'll get the emails one after another until you've actually completed it. But in all seriousness, you know, we need to have these conversations, and it needs to be brought down to a level that, you know, it's not going to be boring and stuffy and, oh, I can't use my time to, you know, read all of this stuff, because, you know, if you do look at some T's and C's, you know, they're gone forever. You know, we need to cut to the chase. What does it actually mean? What do we need personally, need to be really concerned about and know about? And it's making that information digestible, understandable, and absolutely transparently clear.
Thank you. Can I have, so in the room, can you raise your hand if you are involved in your institution in discussions about student data and privacy? Yeah, okay, so this is something that is a lot of us are involved in as part of our work. And are you, so that question was about involved in the institution. How many of you are involved in discussions with vendors and suppliers about data and privacy? Okay, so if you can raise your hands right up, because I think that that's an area that we can share knowledge amongst the community, because if we're all separately in discussions with vendors about what they're doing with our student data, it might make sense to just check the kinds of answers that we're getting from the various different suppliers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions from the floor? I know that we're keeping you from coffee, and it's gotten a little bit chilly in here, so we all need to run down to coffee and snacks. Okay, I'm going to let you go for your coffee. We're going to have a break for coffee time, and then we start the dozens and dozens of parallel sessions. Thank you very much. We can give Sue another thank.
Edina's work with learning technologists helps to develop skilled, data-literate students who can change our world for the better. Teachers and students can develop and share coding skills with Notable, our Jupyter Notebook service. Our Digimap services deliver high-quality mapping data for all stages of education. Future developments include a text and data mining service, working with satellite data and machine learning, and smart campus technology.